yeah, February, March time 1980. And we recorded about 3 singles, which was Confused Action, Plans for Today, and Nightmares we recorded towards the very end. That came out in January 81.
I did at least 2, maybe 3 singles with the Reluctant Stereotypes and an album which was called The Label. Steve Edgson, who was a real good friend of mine, I really respected him. He's not only a great person, he was a great innovative clarinet player. Played not like any, and again a bit like the trombone, he was already doing on a clarinet, which I had already found was boring about a trombone on its own. Put something on it that you wouldn't generally hear on a trombone. He was doing the same thing with the clarinet. He was going through all sorts of like guitar pedals with all these weird sounds and effects on. And there's just a lead coming out these pedals straight into the desk. So
I think what was the most interesting thing about the Reluctant Stereotypes, and again, you know, it's a uniqueness, was the fact that they featured on most of their tracks a clarinet, which was unheard of before and since, yet it worked really, really well.
Playing with the Stereotypes because Steve Edson was a quirky guy and Paul Sampson was a talented guitarist, you know, and it just, you know, it's just one of them bands.
When it was released, Warner Brothers got done for hyping of a big World in Action thing, and so we didn't just get any hype. We didn't get any promotion, and although we got A-listed on Radio 1 for a couple of weeks, the record didn't appear in the shops until about a month after that.
They had to drop all the acts that they had at that time that hadn't had any success because of the fact that they had to start from like the slate clean, really, which is a bit annoying for us.
I think when we went through that process and came to the end of it, and you know the records didn't become hits, WA, who were very speculative about Stereotypes, again this is with experience and hindsight, I know that they would have just signed this band to see if it could become a hit machine. They were the only label that didn't have a two-tone band, and we were, you know, Stereotypes was a Coventry two-tone, well, two-tone inspired band, so it's like we'll have one of them and we'll throw the money at the wall, if it sticks we're away. But they invested no money in that group, they didn't promote it, they didn't market it, they did nothing. And so, unsurprisingly, it did nothing.
I think the reason Reluctant Stereotypes end is because we actually did do a hell of a lot in a small space of time. And because we did a lot in a small space of time, we expected a lot in a small space of time. So we released 4 singles and an album. Somebody could research this, but I'm sure we probably did 250 gigs or whatever. And we'd done a couple of television appearances because we did Look Here with Toyah Willcox as well. And we'd had the airplay, and we thought that, and then two-tone started to die, the reggae sort of ska-y influenced music.
I think at the time the transition of the band wanted to go, well, 2 of us wanted to go one way and Paul and Steve Edson wanted to go another way, another direction, and that's when the band broke up.
It got to the stage where in my heart I wasn't really into the music that was starting to appear in the mainstream, and I always had more of a love for the Beatles and bands that hammered out sort of thing. And I think we just felt that we can carry on and it just might get worse. So basically it just kind of, we all felt like going in a different direction.
Well, I think they felt they tried it, it didn't work. They didn't want to be in that kind of a group anymore. They'd already started a new venture on the, you know, more kind of psychedelic inspired duo, Pink Umbrellas. And I think for Horizon, who were managing the group, it was just like, well, they wanted to wash their hands of it quickly as well. It's kind of, it hadn't worked, it hadn't turned into the cash cow they'd hoped it was going to be. So it's like, if they could persuade everybody to split and finish, then, you know, their involvement and their commitment to it was also written off. And so that was that really. It kind of ended that way. Paul and Steve wanted to go separately, and Tony, Colin and I walked out of the room, and I remember the guy saying, so what's happening now? And I was like, well, we'll carry on, we'll just form another band.
I knew it was good. It was, but it was to actually get it recorded was an absolute triumph of the will, because the band were splitting apart, not talking to one another, not talking to Jerry, You know, Jerry was like, you know, had spent the past sort of like 3 years keeping 6 very different people together, and those 6 very different people all changing all the time, being, you know, becoming other things than they were when the band first started, when we had something in common. And so it was a real triumph of the will to get them all in the same place at the same time playing this piece of music. And I think that kind of sense of despair and hopelessness came across in the way it was in the finished product. I thought it was absolutely amazing. I'd never heard anything like it before. Didn't know whether it was going to be you know, the iconic piece of music that it ended up. It was scary as hell sitting in my flat in Whitley, watching the news, you know, in July 1981 when Ghost Town was #1, and having it played in the background of all this, you know, riots in Toxteth and Bristol and London. It was really, you know, and I think people have said, you know, never has, you know, the pop music captured the time and been so prescient about, you know, about stuff, you know, about Britain. It was scary, but like, you know, a real compliment as well. Great piece of music. I loved Rico's solo in the extended 12-inch thing. It was the first time we ever done like a 12-inch version, which was like, okay, play the song now, but just keep playing at the end, and that solo. And I loved the fact that it was recorded in a basement in Leamington Spa on 8-track, when at this time everybody was going to Compass Point in Nassau and recording on 48-track and all this kind of stuff. No, we went right back to our roots, and it was mixed in John Collins's front room in Tottenham, you know, on 2 Revox reel-to-reel tape recorders. It was just totally lo-fi, and which was, I thought, was wonderful. Right back to that punk Channel 1 reggae roots. Cocked a snook at, you know, the current trends in overproduction and waste and sort of that sort of grandiose rubbish that punk rock kind of railed against, but was coming back into fashion.
When you listen to the song, it kind of shows, like, it tells you that, like, Coventry was kind of struggling with getting jobs and stuff, like, so it's just kind of explaining that, but like as a song.
The song reflected how Coventry was looked and felt at the time because of the loss of jobs, as all the factories, the car factories, had closed down, and it just reflected how Coventry was and how much, like, how bleak Coventry was, and that it felt and it was a ghost town.
By the time we sort of reconvened to do Ghost Town, everybody had had their own little cliques and mindsets, and I think that's the Funboy 3 was, you know, sort of talked about between Neville, Limval and Terry. Roddy was, you know, was going to do his solo stuff. I didn't know what the dickens I was going to do. I mean, I still had faith in Jerry, you know, because he was, you know, Ghost Town proved that, but it was very difficult for us to communicate with one another.
As a fan of Coventry music, it was a dark day when I found out that the Specials were going to split, especially after Ghost Town had hit the #1 spot. But I hadn't realised then, but we in fact may have lost one great band, but we had now 2 more, with the Special AKA and of course the Funboy 3. In the early 80s there was a really quite a cult music scene going on in Coventry, and there were 3 bands. There was Skeet, the band that I played in, there was the Jessie Boy 5 and a great band called Xander's System, and we all met up and enjoyed Chris Long's Doc Lang's Rhythm Clinic, which often would happen at the Hope and Anchor and indeed Guy's Club and Busters. But it was a real surprise to us one day when we were watching The Switch. This was the programme that took over after the first series of The Tube finished on Channel 4. And the Funboy 3 were on, playing The End by the Doors, and it was great to see our friend Toby Lyons from Xander System playing keyboard. What we hadn't realised though for the Funboy 3, that really was the end, and it was the formation of the colour field. Whilst that new great Coventry band were forming in the colour field, it was interesting that Special AKA was still going and had just produced probably one of Coventry's most important singles, Free Nelson Mandela.
I think Free Nelson Mandela is one of those things which you can underestimate. I think particularly from somebody like myself who grew up around here and accepted the Specials as one of our local bands, I think we can really underestimate their global impact. Free Nelson Mandela, I think, is beyond an awful lot of pop music, probably beyond virtually all pop music, because it had an impact upon the actual world events. I think there's no doubt about it to my mind that although the South African apartheid regime didn't release Nelson Mandela because of this pop song, there's no doubt about it in Britain, prior to Jerry writing the song and then releasing it, I don't think very many people knew about Nelson Mandela. People even less knew about the issues around his imprisonment, and there was a general feeling that he kind of got overlooked a little bit. I think by this, public awareness was raised. As a result of the public awareness being raised, there was a sense of injustice that led to pressure on a government which at the time was not sympathetic towards his plight, and as a result they had to bend a bit. And as soon as that started happening, I think it started a public awareness push which eventually released him simply through awareness being raised. And I think that what subsequently happened, the fact that the great man himself clearly appreciated the gesture, was prepared to go on stage with Jerry Dammers and acknowledge it, the fact that they had that huge Mandela Day concert off the back of it, I think were all major things, and I don't think very many pop songs can say that. It's a great pop song. I know Jerry wrote it deliberately so it's an anthem so it can be easily sung. I think it's a wonderful bit of songwriting. I think he's very overly modest in his attitude towards it, playing it down. I think he ought to be aware of it. I'm sure he's aware of it, he's just a very modest guy, but it's a wonderful record and it made an awful lot of difference. And I think if you had to choose one record which actually changed the world, possibly Nelson Mandela is the one.
I picked this single because it was it brought out the message of free him. Not a lot of people knew that he'd been 22 years in captivity. It's all in the lyrics that Jerry Dammers wrote, and it was for a great cause, and it just spread the word and it went worldwide, and eventually he did get released, so it actually took part in his release, this single, so what an achievement.
We were musically trying to fuse Teardrop Explodes and Simple Minds and theatre, because I was still in I was very over the top theatrical performer with Stereotypes, embarrassingly so when I think of it now, but I mean I wasn't drama school, so it's I was just using what I had. We very quickly got the other people in the band, Jim Lansbury of course, who ended up becoming king. Jim, who had been in Team 23, which was, I guess, they were all labelled Coventry's Dexys Midnight Runners. They were like the soul band in Coventry. And Mike Roberts, or Mick Roberts, who I'd known again around the city as you would have done. He was in the MPs for a while, who Stereotypes had played with, and I'd ended up being in the Belgrade Theatre on a number of occasions where Mick could sit down at the piano and play and entertain everybody as we were drinking, because he was a brilliant musician and a great singer actually, Mike, and he'd be doing his Elton John and Billy Joel tunes, which he obviously had down pat and was very good at. So I liked Mike, and so we had the members very quickly, and in fact we even had a trumpet player who came from Team 23, Lynn Thompson. Yeah, Lynn Thompson joined us. We rehearsed at the General Wolf. Ken Brown used to run the General Wolf and supported a lot of up-and-coming bands in the city for many years. He very generously gave us a room upstairs to rehearse in, which is where we spent a couple of months. And we put a set together and did these shows. And I invited Perry Hayes, who had, of course, Perry had actually come along to Reluctant Stereotypes. I mean, Perry had seen Reluctant Stereotypes on the Old Grey Whistle Test and thought, oh, I like them. So he'd come along to see the group when we were at the Marquee to introduce himself. And in his head, I know, he later told me, he was thinking, oh, I'd like to get involved and manage this group. He saw a potential there. Unfortunately, he was arriving at the time as we were collapsing, so there wasn't a group to manage. I think within weeks of Perry introducing himself to the project, probably within a month later, we'd split up. But we did stay in touch, and he said, well, you know, I like what you're doing. You know, I think you've got real potential. Obviously, that's why I've come. So whenever you get together next, give me a call, and you know, I'll come along and see what I think about it. So I invited him up to see Raw Screens, and he was kind of polite, but he was like, you know, that's not what you should be doing. Nobody in any planet at any moment in time is going to be interested in that kind of stuff. So I suggest you think again, which was fair enough. And I then went to spend a lot more time in London with him, a couple of months hanging out down there. And between he and I, we began to talk about. He then opened up a lot more about what he saw in me as a potential frontman, and what he when he first saw the Algorithm Test and then came along to Stereotypes gigs, and what he saw in me as a potential, you know, star. You know, you could be this, but really, with your voice and your looks, you need a kind of thing around you that's this. And we kind of discussed this stuff, and I think in our own references we were talking about a great dance band, you know, an entertaining live act. That's what we wanted to be. And bit by bit, and as the name became something that was like, okay, well maybe we should call it King. And that was actually his partner at the time, his co-manager, who came up with the name King. You know, that's a great name for the group. And through that we got to this notion of, well, maybe that where we should be is, you know, somewhere between Queen and Prince.
I think we had a lot more freedom, especially myself, with King, because it was more of a non-manufactured sound, whereas I'd say the Stereotype sound was more orchestrated in a studio environment, whereas King was more live oriented. You know, it was built on the live sound and playing live and all the sort of experiences and feels you get from that. So that was the difference. Both enjoyable to play in.
I think with us, you know, we just spent a long time rehearsing really hard with a good manager in the background, so we were developing our ideas, and the whole style and look of King, which Perry has a very, of course, a big part of, in the sense of I was very much the muse and the close horse of how it looked, but then off the back of that and what we were making sonically, you know, Perry was thinking, okay, it needs to be this, and as I say, the kind of tougher kind of, and that's where the boots came from, and all this lean, muscular dance rock thing.
King was a great experience because of the fact that we played on a lot bigger audiences, you know, stadiums, touring with Culture Club, Paul Young in America.
And that, I suppose, was what kind of broke the band. And then the next tour we did had actually been booked before Love and Pride charted, or you know, got high up in the charts. So we were booked into kind of relatively small venues, but all of a sudden we were, you know, we'd been on top of the pops. And that tour was fantastic. That was just ridiculous. We were playing 300 and 400 capacity venues that were absolutely jammed. People, you know, outside trying to get in, people climbing in through dressing room windows and God knows what. It was just fantastic. And that really, I suppose, was, if there ever was King Mania, I suppose that was sort of the start of it. And then it was just bonkers for probably 2.5, 3 years after that. It was bonkers. We were everywhere.
I think for all of the moments that I always come back to with King, and if people ask me, you know, what do you remember, what was the best bits, it's usually always live stuff, because I think that's what we were. King was a fantastic live performer.
You know, it's only later on in life you realise what you've actually achieved, probably, and you know, I feel very lucky to have done what I've done. I suppose it's like being a football player or winning the lottery, you know, to do something you love doing and getting paid well for it. And probably not appreciating it as much as you do when you're younger, you know. But yeah, it was great fun.
In real terms, I think by the time we got to the end of '85, it kind of, a bit like a love affair. When you really throw yourself into somebody, you do everything together, and you think, we're a team, you know, me and you, darling, this is what we do, and I'll do it for you, and you'll do it for me. And then you discover that person doesn't quite feel the same way about that, and actually they're pulled back a little bit, and that trust you thought you had, and that understanding you thought has now been questioned and is not the same. Then on both sides, it's not quite the same relationship anymore. And in some cases you can override that and get it back together, or in other times you think, well, actually I don't know if I want to be with this then. And I think that's what happened to us in real terms.
I guess with the emergence of all the 80s, like hysteria and festivals, it felt about right to sort of put ourselves back in the shop window, hopefully to be chosen, you know, up amongst the Rick Astleys and the Sonyas of the world sort of thing. And got a lot of unfinished business really, that we wanted to have fun really and explore the old songs again. So that was why we chose to kind of get it together now really. And as far as Paul, he was asked, and he just felt it wasn't right for him at this sort of time to put himself back in the spotlight, which we kind of knew from previous sort of, you know, conversations we've had with him.
Yeah, they have asked, and he has asked on a few occasions down the years, to look at you know, doing events. You know, do you want to get together and do something for this, or and I've always said no, and it's mainly because it's not something I wanted to do.
I think with the emergence of Tony Dangerfield now on vocals, it's given us a real edge and a positive move, you know, into recording new material for the future.
But what is it? Is it the singer or is it the song? Is it, you know, what makes a band? I mean, if you ask 100 people what makes a band, you probably get about 80, 90 different answers to that question. You know, it's it's the front man, it's the songs, or it's the image, it's the drummer, it's the bass player. You know, but no, I mean, they are big boots to fill.
And of course in 1987 Coventry City FC and of course the music scene became one.
The year of the cup final, in the December before that, I actually had a feeling, just the way the feeling was going with the team, that we were going to win the cup the next year.
And she told me this, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And I said to Steve, we're going to win the cup. I said, and I've got this. And then this song started to come in my head. And I said, we must go and put this down. And Steve looked at me as if I'd got 6 heads and thinking, you know, is she all there? So we did. We put this song down and we actually, you know...
You put a lot of it down.
Yeah,
you
a lot
finished
of it.
the words, did you?
No, I didn't. I haven't got the whole...
We had the hook line and we had the idea of it and where it was going to go and everything else, but we didn't actually complete it. We just thought, well, there it is, you know, and if
That's
your instincts are right,
yeah,
that's it will work.
Yeah.
I sent it to EMI, and a guy, a legend at EMI, and people who know the music business will know Vic Lanza. He was a really sort of big executive there, and spoke to him on the phone and sent him the song. He listened to it, he rang, he said, I think the song's great, but we've had the accountants look at the gates that Coventry City gets, and to be honest, it's not something that we would get involved with. So, you know, good luck with it, but it's not for us. So that was the end of that.